Welcome to Perspectives with Mzu. My guest today is Songezo Zibi, who is a well-known social commentator. He reflects a lot on social issues, especially on social media, formerly Business Day editor. We're going to have a conversation about misinformation as a threat to democracy, how misinformation, or what many characterize as fake news, threaten our democracy. In what ways does it erode trust in our institutions, both social and political institutions, and I would also say economic institutions. So, welcome, Songezo.
Thank you, Mzu.
Perhaps the best place to start would be to really characterize fake news or misinformation. What are we talking about exactly? Why is this such a concern today?
So, this podcast that you and I have just started recording now is going to be freely available on social media. It can be downloaded and then edited and then represented in a way that suits a particular narrative. There can be sound clips of it which are cut in a particular way, put in a different sequence to how you and I had this conversation, and deployed at particular times when those out of context comments can be read to be acerbic or to mean something they do not mean at all. That's the kind of thing we're dealing with. So it is increasingly sophisticated, and it is done by the powerful as well as they're not so powerful alike, because the instruments of media and editing have become readily available in the same way that you and I are recording this podcast and we're not doing this at a radio station.
That's a wonderful place to start, because anyone can create content today. The tools that used to be inaccessible, that were seen as very technical and complex to edit, to record, to rejoin or regraft pieces of information, to create cinematography. Those instruments are freely available and they are cheaper, because now a lot of that is integrated into your mobile phone. So you could record a clip, or you could get into some site that could be a construction site, or it could be a shopping area, and start recording, and in the process introduce your own characters to create something that is not quite a reflection of what was originally. Similarly with news reporting, there are many people today who are news reporters, because there is no certificate, as it were, for this kind of thing, especially in a very open society where media is open. The instruments of technology have facilitated this and allows a great number of people to dabble into news creation or news making, to project opinions, or to present themselves as expert peddlers of news, etc. So it can be quite dangerous, but there's nothing new to this, really.
No, it's not.
In essence, because if you cast your mind back to the times of Stalin in Russia, when propaganda was a very powerful weapon in the hands of the elites, right into the 30s, every country, Hitler relied on propaganda. Even in the West, the propaganda or the misuse or mispresentation of information used to be the exclusive domain of the elites. But what we see today is something on a large scale. What does this mean for the times we live in?
So, I think initially I said it's not new. Actually, this is a new manifestation of an old problem. It's become more sophisticated. Traditional propaganda was aimed at at influencing people to believe a particular view and to take an adverse or to develop an adverse opinion of an opposing view. Whether this was the East-West divide, North-South, socialism versus liberal democracy argument, and so on. What you had, and even in cases of war, the battle lines were clearly drawn. Often they were political, right? Or ideological. And therefore propaganda had a certain context in which it was operating, either war or ideological or a combination of the two. What we have is something that is infinitely more dangerous now. And the purpose of it is to confuse society, to not believe anything in particular, to have no trusted source of information, because alternative facts are put on the table, which are not facts at all, which very often are fabrications, which are backed up by either contrived evidence, which is not evidence, or no evidence at all. The purpose is to confuse society so that people cannot work out who is a good guy and who is a bad guy. It is designed to engineer chaos. You asked, why is this important or why is this dangerous? In a democratic society, it is particularly dangerous because the foundations of a democracy are premised on free speech, they're premised on free expression, freedom of assembly, and all of these things. When people exercise these rights in pursuance of a phantom, it then becomes a weapon against democracy itself. Because what happens is when you then start taking measures against this false peddling of information, you start looking like a dictator, because that is what dictators do.
Before we get to specifics, so that we sort of move from the abstract and also talk about sort of the concrete manifestation of these in the country we live in and in the world that we exist in. You describe this as a danger to democracy. You describe this as something that creates or sows, seeks to sow confusion to a large number of people. It seeks to it's not unlike the old forms of propaganda. It's designed to make people not to believe anything. So it is to generate, engender cynicism. Now, this phenomenon is a product of democracy. It's a stepchild of democracy.
Yes, it is.
Because if you look at certain societies where there is democratic deficit, and the answer, of course, is not that we need to be like those societies, but perhaps it may just very well be that we need more powerful restraining factors that do not impinge on liberties. And we'll talk about this. How strong, how compelling, therefore, is the view that this is against democracy when it is born of democracy?
Because it is when this is used to discredit democratic systems of democratic accountability. So if you have an election that is credible, and a very skilled operator, a bunch of operators manufacture information that proposes that the election was rigged, it becomes subversive in that way. When it gets used to manufacture outrage against the National Prosecuting Authority, for instance, or any other institution that is designed to maintain accountability and order in society within democratic norms, its purpose, therefore, is to weaken the democracy, because without that accountability, there is no democracy. You end up with a dictatorship, but you haven't used the force of arms or arresting anyone. What you have done is you've manipulated the public mood, you've manipulated history, you've manipulated things that are very close to people's hearts in terms of evoking emotion, in order to stir them up against institutions of accountability so that you may destroy them. So you use the public and its sense of moral and ethical outrage to destroy morals and ethics. Because the guardians who are otherwise doing a good job are not doing a good job. They're trying to subvert you. They're working against you. So an example with something which had become, we now know about it because it came out in the Zondo Commission, this myth that the National Treasury was sitting on money and was refusing to release money, that people believed. So when it says there is no more money, a critical constitutional responsibility to manage the finances of the country appropriately. When it is then said to be working for dark forces of the past, that's working against the constitution.
And it's intended at sowing mistrust at an important institution in society.
It's sowing mistrust in that institution. You've seen attacks on the judiciary, where there are propositions that the judiciary, these laws are European laws, the constitution is a problem. This is why these pieces of misinformation are real.
And I want us to look at three levels that encompass the totality of society, and to see how this plays itself out. To look at the society itself, beyond politics, but just the social structure, social interactions, how we relate to one another as individuals, as groups of people, how we organize communities, the kind of repertoires that we engage in on a daily basis, and then we look at the economy, the economic structures, business, the business community, the market forces in society, how misinformation plays itself out there, and then we look at the politics, the political machinery, the interaction between society and politics, because I want to see the extent to which this really damages the core, the fundamental basis of our existence, the things that we believe in, the social ethics, public leadership or trust in public leadership, how we view business, how we view business leaders, how we view corporates in society. Can you perhaps break it for us, starting in society? How does this manifest itself?
So in society, it manifests itself in two ways mostly, and it utilizes two drivers in society. The first is poor access to accurate information. Where people are not able to quickly go and check whether what I'm being told is true in a language that I can understand. And by that, I don't necessarily mean all our indigenous languages, but even in the case of English, where people can speak English, inaccessible English. So do I understand the meaning of the information that is out there, and therefore can check whether or not it is true? So that is the first thing. The second thing that it utilizes is what I call our belief in the theory of witchcraft. That anything that I do not understand, typically as a result of the former, what I've just mentioned now, lack of access to information, if I do not understand it, then there must be some dark force which is behind my misery. These two create a fertile ground for wild conspiracy theories said by very good orators or very influential people, even in small societies, and sometimes what I call light touch magicians. One of our former columnists at the Business Day used to call them, who say the reason you are experiencing what you're experiencing is because, and they offer a falsehood. But because people have no way of checking, a combination of this theory of witchcraft and lack of access to information, i.e. ignorance, means people are therefore likely to believe it. So that's how it tends to manifest itself in society. And anybody who appears to speak with eloquence, with authority, they tend to be believed because they must know what they're talking about, and I have no way of checking easily.
Let's get to the the corporate layer.
Yes.
Because in South Africa, in recent times, say about a year, 2 years ago, we had the Bell Pottinger phenomenon.
Yes. Yeah.
Essentially, an organization that was hired, a hired gun, to peddle misinformation, pure and simple.
Yeah.
And it gave a bad name to PR, public relations organizations. But we began to think that maybe all public relations information have been doing this, but in more sort of in less insidious ways. The subtle messages that the seeds of this are already sown in the ethics of business, how companies do business, how PR firms do business, how advertisers conduct their business. It's always in psychology they would talk about the subtle messages of advertising, how they present images, how they present angles, and this may not necessarily be done in destructive ways oftentimes, but we've had elements of these, but now they are on an overdrive, and we'll get to, I'm sure you get the gist, we'll get to the instruments that facilitate this and that that give it greater propensity, and that makes that makes the effect all the more greater to society. What are other ways in which perhaps private companies, the private sector, and it's not homogeneous, obviously. In what other ways can we observe this in economic structures or in corporate structures?
I think the most common one, or the most pervasive, is subtle misrepresentation of the advantages or so-called advantages to a consumer, and whether or not it would be good for them. And we've seen over the years things which are actually, let's take tobacco companies for instance, where they used to be advertised with very glamorous pictures of people surfing in bright blue beaches with white sand, really healthy people doing very healthy things when actually smoking is nothing of the sort. So you've come from a history where advertising has done that sort of active misrepresentation to a point where it is really subtle, i.e. something is not really proven to work, but through clever packaging and sometimes misrepresentation, it is said to provide benefits which are not there. Just 2 years ago, if it was even 2 years ago, the medication Nurofen, there was a version of that painkiller that was said to cure period pains. It turns out it didn't. They withdrew the product. But the product had been there, out there, sold. So there are many instances where that kind of misinformation is driven. The motive is profit. There is damage to society that occurs as a result of it, but most of it pales in comparison, I believe, at least as far as the impact to democracy and to society's cohesion is concerned, it pales into insignificance compared to that kind of impact. Where we need to really be careful, and we've seen an extreme version of it, is what you get in the United States of America, where large corporations essentially control the policy positions of elected representatives, and what political parties represent in Congress and in the Senate, because something is presented as if it is for the benefit of society when it is for the benefit of large corporations. I am not certain that systematically we are there in South Africa, and I think that would be the equivalent from a corporate perspective of this kind of misinformation, where democracy is hijacked by corporations and people just become mere voting cattle in order for corporations to pursue their agenda through legislation.
We'll talk a lot about the politics of this and ways in which this is really damaging to to society. It would seem to me that one of the forces that drive this large-scale misinformation today is the ubiquity of technology, whether social media, access to telephone, access to the instruments that we're using now. Of course, not everyone has access, but a lot of these are now cheaper because you may not need to buy an expensive equipment, but you could just do your misinformation business on the phone. Where I want to get it is I'm reminded of one of my favorite thinkers, the Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard. He wrote a book titled the crowd is untruth, and he was talking about how individuals within a crowd can easily, at least in their minds, lose their own identity and persona, and hide behind this abstract notion of a crowd. So much so that even if they shout all at once, "Kill him" or "Kill her," they don't take responsibility.
They don't take personal responsibility.
Yeah, because they have transformed collectively into a crowd.
I'm a small part of a larger body.
Yes, and then they can leave the crowd and become individuals and assume their persona again. And it would seem to me that in a different sense, we have in the instrument of social media a symbolic expression of a mobilizing ground for crowds to emerge when they are using these instruments. And these are people with individuality. They are fathers, they are, they could be, they are friends, they are brothers to others. They have professions, they could be, managers where they work. They are individuals in different spaces, away from the social media, away from, say, Facebook or Twitter, or any form of a platform that allows information to spread like wildfire. Could it be that perhaps the fundamental problem that we are confronted with is how to regulate social media, the instruments that allow people to amplify collectively anger, to amplify a resentment or disdain, or to agree on things that would otherwise be objectionable if they were standing on their own or conversing outside of these instruments.
I'm not sure that regulating social media could ever work in any event.
Yeah.
Right? I think there is something far deeper that is going on, and that you have a rewiring of the cognitive architecture of human beings through social media.
Yeah.
In other words, the way people perceive information, the way people understand reality has changed, such that while social media used to be the place where you go at a certain point in time, in their minds, people exist on that platform. That becomes the world. That becomes their reality. And they measure everything in terms of how that crowd. So they are permanently in a crowd. They're permanently in a mob. It's not even a crowd, it's a mob, right? Yeah. And when they make moral and ethical evaluations of information that they receive, it's almost always in terms of how the crowd would perceive that information. I'll give you an example, because this is going to be on Twitter. I tweeted a few days ago an extract from the South African National Editors Forum's complaint against the economic freedom fighters. Yeah. There is really horrible language that is being used against women reporters in particular. Things that under normal circumstances, anywhere, whether it is at home, in social circles, it's language that would never be used.
Precisely, yeah.
The responses to a tweet, to my tweet that says there are never any circumstances where this kind of language is okay, 90% of them are saying it is justifiable. It is justifiable. And on a different episode, on this same conversation, we were talking about how people feel that they can be unaccountable. I feel that cognitively, there is no longer a dissonance when people have to do something that inherently goes against their professed beliefs otherwise.
Yeah.
So that becomes normality. And that is what has happened. So the question is, what remains a problem that we have to deal with? I think we do not have the mental skills to deal with this phenomenon. And I think that society is likely to be distorted forever. It's not going to be everybody at once, but there is a large millions of people who are now in this ethical quagmire where it is justifiable to call people those kind of names and to use violent threats against them because you disagree with the work that they do.
Yeah.
But this is what you get. It goes to the kind of questions that people ask. There's another question. What is the worst thing you've ever done to a lady? You would think people would be outraged. No.
Yeah.
People were sharing stories of the most horrible things they've done to women.
Yeah.
Now, it's an environment where you feel you can... There's nothing political about that, but do you see what I mean about the degeneration of the norms, the ethical norms as we understood them before, to this new environment where there is either no accountability or outrage or complete outrage, disproportionate outrage.
We'll come back to this question of regulation because I'm quite keen that we explore it a little bit. I'm just thinking that the social media is, if you like, an analogy. It's really a theater of contestation, ethical contestation. It's also a theater of other forms of contestations, ideas, views, perspectives, and so on. But as a theater of ethical contestation, it, in a very subtle way, has an effect in our ethical orientation as human beings. I mean, if for a moment we can think about the complexity of a human being, you don't have purely ethical individuals and purely unethical individuals in their makeup. So there's always a contestation within us between the forces of good and the forces of darkness. I think many of us are striving to reach to the better angels in us, as Steve Pinker would put it. And I think that the social media milieu is designed in the main to abet the negative aspects of a human being. The more darker side. It's designed to cultivate the darker side of individuals. And when you add in the mix a large number of people who are negatively oriented and who have decided that their way of seeing, however crooked it is the best way. Those who are bringing reason, those who are setting better norms and values are almost they are almost setting sails against a hurricane. And it's an unwinnable battle because the architecture, the design of the mechanics of communication, of the intermediating, the platform that intermediate the kind of the conversations that we have is not is not formatted in such a way that we can have productive conversations, we can convince one another, we can find one another. It's essentially designed to harness the West in us. Even some good people, great individuals that you could have coffee with, which you may have had coffee with, and you enjoy their company. And now they spend a lot of time on social media, and the best in them declines, it goes to the sunset, and the worst in them comes to the fore more and more. So I'm thinking of countries, like countries like Singapore, China, that have some form of regulating social media. Don't seem to be battling with what we're talking about.
No, they don't. No, they don't seem to be battling. I guess on the one hand, you could say they're battling with a larger problem, which is keeping those kind of large societies in under control. But this misinformation is most effective in democratic societies.
Precisely because it's massified.
Precisely because it's massified, and access to information is regarded as one of the foundational tenets, free speech, and all of these things. There is constantly a discussion about whether something is free speech or hate speech, and it's a discussion in the manner in which these are resolved is either through mediation, through arbitration. It's not somebody getting locked up. But as soon as you land in China, Facebook doesn't work.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know if you can access Google these days, but I think you can't. And there are certain things that you can't see, like certain search terms that you can't obtain. And so this kind of misinformation that we see uses democratic things that are here, that exist because you are democratic. In South Africa, we've had instances. Let us take the instance where what has now led to SANEF laying a complaint, for instance, where really terrible accusations are made against people, and people are incited to get angry against certain journalists or even members of society.
Yeah.
Now, if you are a news organization, you decide to stream this live. Censorship is not acceptable in a democracy. All political parties must get a hearing. If somebody puts up a box on a street corner with party colors, you want to cover it, you do. So you're live streaming this. But the person, whichever the political party is spewing falsehoods. The journalist has a dilemma. What do? You can't fact check them on the go because there's no opportunity to do that. You cannot cut the broadcast because when you've already started broadcasting, that would amount to censorship. What do? Because your democratic instincts, which is to say, my job is not to censor, it is to make information available, you become a conduit for further confusion and the division of society.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
it's a dilemma that is almost uniquely in its scale to be located in democratic societies.
Yeah, I think we've painted the dangers of misinformation and fake news to society, to social order, to ethics, to the erosion of public trust in institutions, and I think generally in how we live and function as individuals, as communities, and as society. And so I think the dangers are pretty clear. We see them on a day-to-day in South Africa. We've seen them in the US. And we're going to talk about this a bit. I think part one of our conversation we'll leave it here, and the next time we talk, we're going to explore some of the themes that come out of this, and perhaps move towards some solutions, some ideas of what can be done to rescue, to salvage what's left of society. Until we talk again. Thanks, Songezo.
No, thanks, Mzu. Thank you.
Yeah.